But we're going to be discussing two mandates for Cornwall today. One given to us by nature, the need for conservation, and the other given to us by man, the need for affordable housing. It's our hope that you will find the panel helpful in finding ways to work together towards the common goal as stated in the 2020 Town Plan of Conservation and Development, quote, all working hard to steer Cornwall towards a better future. I will introduce our panel and then turn it over to Ingrid as our moderator to let the discussion begin. First, we have Ingrid Ellen, who will be our moderator, and in her spare time, when she's not volunteering for stuff like this, she's the Paulette Goddard Professor of Urban Policy and Planning at the New York University. And then Jocelyn Ayer, Director of the Litchfield County Center for Housing Opportunity. Ginni Block, Chair of the Cornwall Housing Corporation. Heidi Cunnick, Chair of the Cornwall Conservation Commission. Anna Timell, Chair of the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission, and myself, President of Cornwall Conservation Trust. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ingrid. Put your question, there's the chat feature. Just set your questions will go to everyone, but Ingrid will, as the panel discussion goes on, Ingrid will then pick and choose which questions to ask which part of the panel once the roughly half hour panel presentation is ended. I think that will keep us from anyone asking a question that could go on for quite some time or taking the advantage of the platform, so to speak. But I think that will work. Everyone will see all the questions. We probably won't get to all of them, but it would be useful for us to have them anyway. And both, I'm sure, Ginni and I and Heidi and Anna will be helped by those questions. So over to you, Ingrid.
So great. Well, I'm really happy to be here. I have to say, I have just one housekeeping thing is I've been admitting people but I think all of you are getting a pop-up. Well, not all of you who are co-hosts. So is there someone?
Well,
I just want to make sure someone is.
Kara is actually admitting people, although I read an article that colleges are now admitting people that never applied.
Yes, I will admit everybody, so you can just
Okay, good. I'm sorry. It's like, whatever, it's my habit. I'm just admitting people. So I will stop. I'm going to ignore them then.
Okay.
So I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you, Bart, for asking me to moderate this really important conversation about the connection between conservation and affordable housing in Cornwall. I think that I could sit here and introduce all the panelists, give them the rich introductions that they deserve, but suffice it to say that they bring both expertise, tremendous expertise, but also, and maybe more importantly, a shared love of Cornwall. These really are the five people that I would want to discuss these issues with. So I'm very glad that they could all participate. And we're going to start basically with establishing some facts about land use and conservation and affordable housing in Cornwall. And then we're going to go on to discussing challenges. And then finally, we'll end with kind of looking forward to what kinds of initiatives we can collectively adopt that will further both conservation and affordable housing. So I'm going to we'll start on sort of on the fact front and start with you, Bart. And if you can, it would be great if you could just lay out some facts about how much land, how many acres of land there are in Cornwall, and how many are already set aside for conservation.
Yes, okay. Kara, could you put up that slide, please? I just want to make two comments about these slides. First of all, and I've picked neighboring towns for comparison. First, you'll see that the neighboring towns are very large. They're rich in land that deserves conservation. and they're low in population. And you'll see that Cornwall, while it has conserved more than Goshen or Salisbury and Sharon, it's not out of line generally with what you see given the circumstances of these towns. And then I think an interesting, the second point I'd make is the number of acres of land available that haven't been conserved. And what strikes me there is you'll see Cornwall, and these figures change almost daily, frankly, at the acre level. But you'll see that Cornwall has 18,258.98 acres that have not been permanently protected or conserved. And just note that the size of Fairfield County towns, the entire size of Darien, is 14,960 acres. What this says to me is that there is land for more conservation and for affordable housing. We just need to be careful about how we go about managing those two mandates. And really, that's the point I want to make. These towns that we're in are very large. They are rich in conservation resources, but there's lots of land left to work with. That's the end of my.
So Bart, let me sort of jump in and ask you a follow-up. This is really helpful to sort of set the grounding here. I mean, this strikes me as quite a lot of land that's already conserved. Nearly 40% of the acres in Cornwall are in conservation. So does the Cornwall Conservation Trust sort of have an ultimate goal in mind for conservation?
Well, our goal would be wrapped up in our mission, which is to make Cornwall resilient to climate change, protect its scenic values and habitat and water resources. Where that leads us is open to question. We don't have an absolute figure. One thing I will say about conservation, it's a free market. There's no way that I can begin a year or we can begin a year and say, okay, these are the 50 or 100 acres that we're going to do something with. Usually what happens is a property comes on the market, somebody dies. It's all very much by chance. And I would point out that that's one of the issues that the Affordable Housing Group has to deal with as well. We have a mission to follow. Clearly, given the percentage of land that's been protected, we're going to be picky going forward. But our mission still holds, and I think there's still land in Cornwall that's deserving of being permanently conserved.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Can we take these slides down now? Just so, okay, fantastic. So it sounds like there sort of isn't, you don't have a strict goal, and obviously that is important, that it's also, we can't all be centralized planners and choose exactly which lands, which parcels of land we want for conservation versus affordable housing. There's obviously some constraints there. But Heidi, I'd love to kind of ask you basically the same question, but from the standpoint of Cornwall's Conservation Commissions, is what is your goal for conservation in Cornwall, and at what point is it ever enough, or how do you think about your goals?
It's a really interesting question, Ingrid. I think first, just to clarify, the Conservation Commission is a little bit different than the Conservation Trust because we don't have land acquisition as part of our mission. And so we look to develop and apply practices to land to deliver the mandates, if you will, of the Plan of Conservation and Development for the town of Cornwall. We're very much an advisory committee or commission. And one of the things we look to do is to understand what lands do we need to protect to deliver the ecosystem services that are so important to all of us. And when I say ecosystem services, probably everybody has a sense of what I mean, but they sort of fall into the category of recreational. So all of the trails we have to hike and the our scenic routes, our hunting, our fishing, all of those things that we love to do here in Cornwall. And also there are ecosystem services that are related to economic drivers. So again, sort of similar, but activities that bring people here and hopefully pump dollars into the economy. So again, hiking, biking, skiing, fishing, hunting, all of these things are economic drivers. We look to protect for ecosystem services to deliver clean water, clean air, crop pollination. So as conservationists, we want to make sure that our the properties that we do, the efforts that we develop protect those things. So that we can continue the delivery of those ecosystem services. And I think the other thing that's sort of baked into the question that you ask that's interesting is that, you know, how much sort of implies that the more we conserve, the better our conservation is. But in fact, I think the commissioners hope that everybody in Cornwall is a conservationist and that we can practice conservation on every acre in our town, whether there are buildings on it, whether we're living on it, you know, being good land stewards, clearing our acreage of invasive species, making sure we have riparian buffers when our lands are adjacent to waters, participating in the no-mow month of May. All of these things can be done collectively and can be almost as powerful as setting aside acreage.
Yeah, that's really helpful to sort of think about that all of us basically, even on land, if we happen to own land and we live on it, even there, that we need to pay attention to conservation goals. It's not just about setting aside, and there may be also, you've got to make sure that even the land that's in conservation is advancing the goals of you know, diversity. And let's talk about affordable housing now. And Anna, let me turn to you. So we worked together on, I never remember the name of the group, but it was the group that put together the town's affordable housing plan. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, share sort of how much affordable housing there currently is in Cornwall, kind of laying out the same kind of set of facts on the affordable housing side and what the town's affordable housing goals are.
All right. Well, first of all, what we have, the Connecticut Department of Housing keeps a list. Cornwall has 36 units of affordable housing. 18 of those are at Coogan Village, 10 are at Bonnybrook. There are 2 units that get some state assistance to pay rent, and there are 6 units that have mortgages with state or federal assistance. Now, the 2020 census says that we have 1,002 total housing units, and that means that 3.6% of our housing is affordable. The towns of Norfolk, Litchfield, Falls Village, and Canaan have higher percentages than we do, and the rest of the Northwest corner towns have less. Warren is particularly famous for having 0. The 2020 census, sorry, I'm reading this and I moved back a line. The state of Connecticut is pushing 10% as the goal. And I don't know where they drew that number from. But that means that we need 84 more units. And the other factor that I think is important as far as information or data goes is that when you look at the Census Bureau's data from the American Community Survey 2016 to 2020, 34% of owner-occupied households were considered cost burdened, and 64% of people renting in Cornwall were considered cost burdens. The Department of Housing and Urban Development defines cost burden as people who are spending more than 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. And so the actual number of households in Cornwall that are cost burdened adds up to 230. Of those, 74 are paying more than 50% of their annual monthly income for housing. So that kind of paints a very different picture of what's going on in Cornwall. And, you know, the people who live here, we're all in this together. I think we should care deeply about people who are living with that kind of chronic stress.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I mean, thanks, Anna. I mean, I think it is a very good point about sort of, you know, it's hard to know exactly where to sort of set the goalposts here, right? That it's sort of on the one hand, technically, you know, we have to build, what, another 74? You said 84 units
84.
To reach the sort of the state's benchmark, but you know, even that, you still might have a lot of renters who are cross-burdened in the town. So clearly there's a lot of need, but you know, it's not indefinite. We're still talking about sort of a relatively limited number of units would make a big difference. And so, Ginni, I mean, I think that there is, I'd love to turn to you as the, you know, wearing your Cornwall Housing Corporation hat and say, you know, I think there's a lot to be proud of for what the Housing Corporation has accomplished in creating affordable housing. But it also seems like we have a steeper hill to climb with respect to affordable housing than with respect to conservation. And so I'm wondering, it's sort of, if you could just sort of benchmark, if you could find the sites, how much land would the town need to say, let's just sort of put this at like 80 more units of housing or something, of affordable housing. How much land would you need to actually to build those 80 units?
Thanks, Ingrid. And I'd like to thank the Cornwall Conservation Trust for organizing this. I think it's a really important conversation that we will need to continue. The town has good potential when it comes to land for affordable housing. The math doesn't translate directly to specific acreage because one has to look at the topography of each piece and see what it could support in terms of housing. So a piece that would require a long driveway or a water crossing or you know, has a significant slope would increase the cost pretty significantly. I can share what has been done on land that has been bought below market price or donated. And some of this is what Anna has already shared, but Bonnybrook, Koopman, and parcel program lots are all examples. Bonnybrook, which has 10 rental units for seniors, has a 5.6 acre parcel. The building, the well, and the septic are all on just 1 acre of that land. So the rest of it is undeveloped. So essentially there's a green zone behind it, and the planners were intentional in having greenery in front of it as well. Koopman's another example of multi-unit housing where there's 18 units on 6.6 acres. The units themselves only occupy 1 acre, while the well and the septic do take up more of that land. And there's greenery there as well between the road and the houses, including native plants. The parcel program has 1 to 2 acre lots. 11 of them already have houses. 2 have driveways ready for construction and 2 are undeveloped. And I think one of the things that's really significant is to look at Potter Woods. There we have 2 undeveloped parcels that are, you know, approximately 1 acre, and Ginni Potter has deeded almost a little over 20 acres for open space. So I think that's a really good model. So there's not really a specific answer to your question. You know, I think if you look at my numbers were a little bit different than Anna's. You know, the town's goal is 30 more units in 5 years. So we need less than 30 acres. But even if you look at needing 84 units, I think you have to consider that, you know, we can rehab some houses, we can purchase houses, existing houses. So there are options in terms of reaching that goal that don't necessarily mean purchasing lots of land.
Yeah, and even if you did, though, it sounds like if you were able to build multi-unit housing, you're talking about, you know, less than 40 acres or something of housing. that's not a lot of acres when I think, Bart, you said there were 18,000 acres of land available in Cornwall.
Well, don't forget, some of those are already developed.
I know some of those are already developed, but
Some
let's
of
just
them
say sort of just benchmarking.
Right, some of them are
It's,
great.
it's not a lot of
speed.
acres, so, but I guess that Jocelyn, I'd love to ask you as sort of, you have a great perspective on not only Cornwall's challenges and but also in the region. I'm just wondering, like, do we have any idea of how many of those 18,000 acres are developable? Like how much, I mean, a lot of Cornwall's land, I mean, Ginny talked about topography, a lot of it is on slopes, and that would be very difficult to build on and may not accommodate the septic needs. And
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. And I just want to say I've had over the last 14 years the pleasure of working on these issues with many of the towns in the region, including Cornwall, about this sort of question of how can we meet both our conservation and our development goals. I will say quickly, in terms of the number of acres that are developable or not developable for housing in Cornwall, especially affordable housing, to me, that isn't the most important question. To me, the most important question is how many acres does the Cornwall Housing Corporation have access to? And right now, it's not very many. So that's, for me, the most critical question is how do we get the Cornwall Housing Corporation access to land so that these affordable housing goals can be met? And I do want to just quickly show everybody this map that when I was working with the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission some years back with Anna and David Colbert, and I think Karen's on the call today and some others. One of the things that David was working on, which I think is a great starting point for a tool on thinking about this, was a land development suitability map. And I know you can't see this because it'll be tiny on your screen, but you can see there's a lot of gray here. And that area is not suitable for development for a variety of reasons. Now, if you read the fine print on this map, you'll see that this is really a planning tool. It's not a site-specific tool. So there could definitely be parcels that are shown in gray that do have some potential. But I think what this map shows is that there is a fairly limited number of acres that are likely developable. But again, so there's a limited number of acres that are really suitable for development, again, because they've got, they don't have steep slopes. Some of the things that Ginny was saying, they don't have critical habitats. But again, the more critical issue is, does the Cornwall Housing Corporation have access to any of those areas that are shown in green here?
that's great. That's really fantastic. And I think, Bart, did you say that you're working on creating an interactive version of that?
Yes, Cornwall Conservation Trust is working on an interactive map that will have, with HVA of Cornwall alone, that will have many layers that you can play with, including, I'm hoping, this layer, so that we want to share that with both the Conservation Commission, Planning and Zoning. At any rate, I hope that will help in figuring out where the sweet spots are for land.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Well, so Ginny, let me turn back to you, because I mean, Jocelyn, is suggesting that the real challenge is not so much, the number of acres. It's really the real challenge in making progress on affordable housing is finding and securing developable plots of land. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how difficult it is for the Cornwall Housing Corporation to both find, but then also acquire sites for affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, going back again to the topography of the land, you have to look at where the land is going to be that we can develop. Most of the land is going to be without access to town sewer. You know, the cost for drilling a well or putting in a septic can vary tremendously. You know, if you're drilling in a clear open field for a well, it could be $1,000. If you've got to drill into ledge, it could be $20,000. And the same is true for, you know, putting in a septic. You know, if you've got soil and sand and gravel, you can put in a 3-bedroom septic, it could be $15,000. Once you get into more adverse conditions, which is probably what you're going to find in most of Cornwall, you know, then the cost can be more than double. It can be over $35,000. So I think, you know, that is the key factor. I think another factor is really, you know, a lack of understanding, education, awareness. I think we really need to be able to involve more residents to understand how critical that need for affordable housing is, and recognize how much our land is preserved. You know, trying to find within what we have that's suitable that land. And it has been done in Cornwall. Cream Hill Lake, you know, the town got land for the town beach, and there were 2 parcels for affordable housing built there. Those are now occupied by people who work in town and live in town. So I think that's a really good model. I think that, you know, we have zoning that allows for multi-unit housing. And I think that we've had a great relationship with P&Z. I think we need to continue that to bring to the table sites that allow, you know, finding that land without taking away from the feel of the town and allowing for conservation at the same time. I go back to what Heidi said, and that is, you know, we have to work collectively both for conservation. We also have to work collectively to find that kind of land. You know, NIMBYism isn't a factor, sure, but we've overcome it in the past, and I'm sure that we will overcome it. So I think the greatest challenges are, you know, really acquiring the land, we need greater funding from the community, you know, whether it's donation of funds, donating land, selling land at below market value. And again, going back to, I think somebody has already mentioned in the questions, you know, we can have accessible dwelling units, ADUs, we can convert older houses to multiple units. So I think there's possibilities.
Right. Well, I appreciate your optimism. Let me just, and I want to come back. I'm glad you brought up zoning. I want to ask Anna in a second about the sort of the regulatory barriers, but can you just talk a little bit about, you mentioned the lack of funding. So I'm just like, you know, if you were to find, and maybe you have identified some sites that you think would be sort of prime candidates for development, does the Cornwall Housing Corporation currently have the funds to sort of acquire those, to sort of to act nimbly to
No. And so, you know, that's a good point. Thanks, Ingrid. You know, we need to have an acquisition fund. We probably will be getting some money from ARPA for a site development. Not the 400,000 that was
not as much that was reported in the Chronicle.
Yeah, I would love that, but going to have less zeros. We know that. But, you know, certainly we need to develop that fund, and, you know, people can go to the cornwallhousingcorporation.com to get more information. The names of all of our board members are on there. We'd be happy to talk to anyone further.
Right. That's great. Well, we'll come back to that and sort of, you know, moving sort of what as a community we can do to help and advance both of these goals. But Anna, so to what extent, you know, wearing your hat now, before I asked you, you know, to answer a question, wearing your hat as sort of a member of the Affordable Housing Group, but wearing your hat as the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, to what extent are Cornwall's land use regulations a barrier to multi-unit housing, to just more housing in general in the town, and what would have to change in order to allow additional housing, and what are the barriers to making those changes?
Good question. if I could just make a distinction for the benefit of everybody in the audience between affordable housing and what we came to call attainable housing, both in the town plan and the affordable housing plan. Affordable housing is a term that requires people to earn less than 80% of the county median income. The current median income for Litchfield County, based on the census information, is $81,590. So 80% of that is $65,000. This is for household income, all people who have jobs and their salaries are added together. If you earn less than that, then you can qualify to apply for housing that is designated affordable by the state. Attainable housing is housing for everybody else who are lower and middle income workers. You know, people with a variety of different jobs that aren't high paying and yet who provide essential services to our town and can't afford to live here, including, as I've learned anecdotally from my children's friends, many young people who actually grew up in town, who can now no longer afford to come back here to live when they've been away from home for a while. They're ready to settle down. They've got jobs, but they can't afford to buy any land or housing. So it's actually a bigger problem than just affordable housing. And the Planning and Zoning Commission needs to address both types. Some of the questions in the chat actually kind of point towards some of those issues. So the Planning and Zoning Commission, we're aware that our land regulations need to be looked at, especially we're interested in the idea of accessory apartments, making those easier to find. That would be a form of attainable housing usually, because I don't know of any accessory apartments in Cornwall that have been deeded as affordable. So we would like to liberalize that. In addition, Connecticut, state of Connecticut passed a law recently that requires municipalities to designate a portion of town where they're going to allow multifamily housing. So the P&Z needs to come to grips with what we can do that would satisfy the intent of the Connecticut statute and what would fit with Cornwall in that regard. We've always had some regulations besides the current accessory apartment regulation. We have two regulations that nobody to my knowledge, has ever taken advantage of. One of those is to transform an older large house into multiple apartments. For reasons that are historic, going back to prehistoric times, the regulation says that such houses have to be at least 15 years old. And that's certainly something that we're going to look at P&Z. The other regulation we have is one that allows something called a planned conservation zone, where you could develop a dense cluster of housing and have a larger area of conserved land. Nobody has ever taken advantage of that either. And I suspect, you know, if we were a town that had our own septic and water supply, that might actually have happened sooner.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Anna. That's very helpful. And actually that last example does suggest clearly some synergies between housing and sort of density and conservation. But I'd like to sort of just hit on one thing head on before we move on to talk about sort of ways to move forward synergistically. But which is that, you know, I think some people have suggested that there is kind of a tension between the kind of land use changes and regulatory changes that Anna is suggesting that would allow for denser housing and conservation. And so I would love to ask both sort of Heidi and Bart, maybe starting with Heidi about whether you see the land use changes that Anna and the commission is working on, and the new housing that ideally would result from those as sort of in any way undermining conservation goals.
Yeah, I honestly don't think we have the luxury to even think about these as being in conflict. It's the affordable housing issue is such an important one for our town. And as you said, Ingrid, if we care deeply about our neighbors, about our towns, there just isn't any conflict. And I think what Ginni said too, despite the fact that when you look at the map, it looks very gray. It looks like there are a lot of areas that are not suitable. That's mainly a function of our topography, these really steep slopes. But if you look at those green areas, which I suspect would translate to a good number of acres, enough acres, I think that the Venn diagram between what is important for delivery of those ecosystem services and where we can build attainable housing, those Venn diagrams don't overlap that much. And I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who came today, and for you, Ingrid and Bart, for setting this up, because I think that having this kind of conversation is part of what it takes to make sure that these two really important efforts aren't in conflict.
Thank you, Heidi. And Bart, so can I ask the same question of you? I think you're on mute.
Yes, sorry. One of the precepts of conservation is to build more densely where you're already developed. And so some of the things that Anna was talking about, particularly the combination of dense building and conservation, means that there are many ways that we can continue to conserve without shutting out for housing, period, not just affordable housing. I will say that when you look at Norfolk, they've had a sewer system for 125 years. Almost all the towns around us have a sewer system. I'm glad that 125 years later, Cornwall has decided to invest in a sewer system, but I'm a little afraid that it's underinvesting. I would love to see that the plant be at the fire station, serve the school, and run pipes into the Cornwall Center and down to West Cornwall. That's probably a lot more money. But that is a real constraint. When you look at those gray areas, the primary reason they're gray is they can't support septic. It's a little ironic that we will now have a sewer system in West Cornwall, but no town water, and we'll have town water in the center of town, but no sewer system. Anyway, I don't see them as the planning and zoning changes where we're talking about building smarter and more densely as being threatening.
That's great. I appreciate that. So, in this day and age, I guess it's nice. I just want to take a moment and just say it's very nice to find some consensus. It's rare in conversations about, these heated issues to actually find people who agree. So I appreciate that. And it sounds like, to spell this out, right, you all agree that there's sufficient land for both affordable housing and for conservation, that we're really talking, to Heidi's point, we're really also talking about different sets of parcels, that the land most suitable for affordable housing is not a key target for conservation. And that thirdly, to Bart's point, that building more densely can further both conservation and affordable housing. And so I'm going to take that as an opportunity to move forward. Thank you we will get to these questions in the chat, so just keep on coming. But I want to just ask the panelists a couple more questions about sort of how do we move forward. And I want to start with Jocelyn, given your experience, to talk about some ways that conservation and affordable housing advocates can work together, and maybe you could share some concrete examples of other, from other communities or projects that have advanced both of the goals.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think there are some very good examples. I'm just going to run through a few of them, both on sort of a site specific level, like we were talking about, and then also, again, sort of planning at the town level or at the regional level. I mean, Ginni did mention a great example right there in Cornwall where you've got Potter Woods, where a portion of the site is conserved for open space and a portion of the site is being used for housing. The example showing on your slide right now is in the town of Litchfield, a development called Gagarin Place, which the Litchfield Housing Trust is building. There's 8 ownership homes. They all have solar panels, and there's 9 acres of conserved land on that one parcel. And I think, you know, there's actually a lot of great examples of that, what's called sort of limited development or conservation-based affordable housing. This is actually like a 120-page report with a bunch of case studies that I came across done by the Conservation Fund, I think out of Virginia. And if anyone is interested in it, I'm happy to share it. I did share it with Bart. He has it, Ginni has it. No examples in this report from Connecticut, but a lot from Massachusetts and other rural areas. Again, where you can take a site, and I've just one example from this report that has many great case studies. This is a site in Massachusetts where they had 47 acres and they conserved a lot of it, but they built kind of mid-density 30 buildings on the site, and each building had 4 units in it, and they kind of made it look sort of like a New England village, kind of rambling farmhouse with common open spaces. So again, I think it's great to think about how you can do both on a parcel. You can have housing options built there and also conserve land. At a different scale, this is an example from Cape Cod. The region's environmental organization and leading housing nonprofit were working together to create a map, you know, maybe kind of like what Bart might be working on. And this map was really meant to be a decision-making tool to help think about, you know, what are the highest priority areas for conservation and the highest priority areas for moderate density housing. And I do want to kind of emphasize the moderate density piece. People kind of jump from talking about density. They always use the word high density. Like, we don't have to go from low density or no density to high density. We can have moderate density, for example, a 4-unit building or a 10-unit building. We don't have to jump to a 40-unit building or a 50-unit building. But anyway, I think this exercise in Cape Cod and, you know, this exercise that we're maybe talking about today in terms of mapping those areas and really thinking together about, look, there are areas in the community that it really makes sense for conservation. There are areas that we just really need those, they're buildable, and we need to, you know, make sure that we think about building in those areas. And then I just want to say, this is your map again, very quickly, this Grow Smart Cape Cod exercise that they're doing there, again, really focused on, you know, they have sort of obviously Cape Cod has a big weekender summer housing market. Cornwall has a similar, you know, weekender market there. And to increase, as they're saying here, to increase the year-round housing, they really need to think about affordable, moderate density development in priority areas. Cornwall, as you might know, is 95% single family housing. So basically you kind of have, you know, not an intentional, but an unintentional policy of basically single family housing sprawl throughout the town. The region-wide Litchfield County, only 74% of the housing is single family. Again, just more diversity in the kinds of housing that are available. Statewide, it's 59%. So I think anytime Cornwall can think about that kind of moderate density, and again, making sure it's going in those green areas that make sense. It doesn't have to be allowed everywhere in town. But in those areas that are buildable, you know, make sure you keep your moderate density there and then conserve the areas around them. Again, either on the site scale, the site level, and also the town level.
Terrific. Thank you, Jocelyn. That's incredibly helpful. Those examples. It's always helpful to see some concrete images. So Anna, let me turn to you and just ask sort of how planning and P&Z in particular can help to balance and further both sets of goals moving forward, both conservation. I mean, you offered one example, but
well, the Planning and Zoning Commission is responsible for both creating and being one of the actors on our 10-year town plan. We last did a town plan with Jocelyn's help in 2019, and it took effect January 1st, 2020. There were 4 subcommittees, 4 different areas of concern: economic development, housing, conservation, and youth/cultural resources. So within all of those 4 categories, the plan developed goals and strategies for meeting those goals, many of which involved regulatory change and therefore would fall on into our hands. One of the things that we did that was very helpful, we did do a townwide survey, and I would say it had pretty good participation. 26% of the full-time residents in town responded, and 10% of part-time residents responded, for a total of, I think, in the 300s. One of the questions that was most interesting to me was that people were asked to rate their top 10 priorities for what needs to happen in the town in the next 10 years. And the 2 top priorities were bringing or making it possible for young people and younger families to move to town, which indirectly speaks to the subject of this, one part of the subject of this discussion. The second was to make it easier for people to conduct business out of their homes. The affordable housing ranked number 4 on the priority list, and more conservation ranked number 6. So it gave us a sense of the will of the people, as I like to say it. Although that can probably be questioned on the basis of the participation rate. But so the P&Z really has to try to balance the 4 different areas, and as well as considering what people want and don't want.
Yeah. So, Bart, one of the things that, I think that the Cornwall Conservation Trust has been fortunate in receiving many generous gifts from residents of land for conservation. And I'm wondering if there, and I know you've thought about this, but if you can talk a little bit about ways to encourage more gifts that would provide land both for conservation and for affordable housing.
Yes, I wish everyone were like the Foote family. As I was walking my dog around the 11 acres that they gave for conservation, I could look uphill and see affordable housing, and I could look across the street to Footfields to the new pickleball court with a whole bunch of people flailing at a ball. People give for different reasons, and whatever new project for the last several years that we've looked at, we've asked the seller or the donor, would they consider hiving off some of the land for affordable housing? And the answer has always been no. And I think it's just personal choice as to what motivates them to donate. The thing that I would emphasize most is finding money for a revolving loan fund. One of the most frustrating events I had was 9 acres on Cream Hill Road, about 100 feet from the school and across the street from the child center owned by the Gilshire family. It was 9 acres. And it was for sale for $90,000. And I tried to get them to agree to donate part of it to affordable housing. Unfortunately, my generation said it was fine. The younger generation wouldn't do it. At any rate, it got sold, and I do see a driveway there. But I wish at the time, and I had talked to Mag Cooley, that there had been some loan fund for $90,000. The Housing Corporation could have purchased that land. And I think that it's nice to think people will donate, but we need to get some money behind the Housing Corporation, and a revolving loan fund that would get paid off once the land is developed would be the way to go. I mean, we'll continue when we're presented with a conservation possibility to ask, is there affordable housing? Frankly, most of the land we've saved is forest and it's not suitable. The land that we've saved that is suitable is drop dead gorgeous farmland. And I don't think in the places that we've saved them, I'm thinking of on Cherry Hill, that we would have liked to have seen a, development happen. Anyway, it was way too expensive for affordable housing.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm going to take a few questions. I mean, I wanted to do a lightning round, but maybe we'll sort of come back to that at the end and sort of get some questions on the table. Shelley Harms asked, isn't it better to concentrate affordable housing units in a village that rather than spreading them all over makes them for a more vibrant community and better access to town water and sewer? And I think that's sort of exactly sort of what Jocelyn's example showed, right? That you can and that kind of planning of moderate density, right, can really further both. So I guess I'm answering that question. I think we've already answered that question. But Ginni, a question for you is Janine Selendi, building on Shelley Harm's earlier comment, are there houses that can be refurbished for use as affordable housing by those who are willing or able to put in the work? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea. We haven't identified those houses. We haven't had people come forward. But I think the more we have these kinds of conversations, the more likely it is that people will have that awareness that that is a possibility. It's not all about just acquiring land. We could buy even, single family homes that might be, sold for below market value. Certainly.
Okay, thank you. And Patrick has an interesting question, and maybe Jocelyn, you could take this as sort of examples from other places, but what consideration has been given to a voucher system, kind of a demand side subsidy, right? In which direct payments can help low-income families afford their housing without the high cost associated with new construction. So it's a related question. It's sort of like, how can we basically create more affordable housing within our existing stock?
So many folks might know that there is a statewide voucher program. It's called the Housing Choice Voucher. It is very challenging to get a voucher. It's literally like winning the lottery. But the most challenging thing now actually is there's quite a few folks that have vouchers and they have nowhere to use them. There's a very, very small number of rental units, period, at any price range. I've talked to lots of people who could afford a lot in rent, and there just isn't any rental stock available. So that's the biggest challenge. And again, I think if you've got moderate density multifamily, it's going to be more affordable by nature to rent than a single family house on 5 acres. I think what the housing stock in Cornwall is like, if you've got, single family house, 95% of your housing stock is a single family house on a lot of acres. Those are more expensive to rent. And I suppose the town could decide it wanted to create some kind of voucher fund, but I think you would find that the gap between what a household at 80% of the area median income could pay and what a single family 3-bedroom house on 5 acres would cost to rent would be quite large and challenging to pay for very long. So that, I guess that would be I think there's a huge need across every town in Litchfield County for rental housing stock, period, at every, price range.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think Jessica Brackman is on the call, but now in her new role, which we're very grateful that she is serving as the town's new housing coordinator, that she is available to help people, learn about and potentially access the rental subsidies that are available from the state and from the federal government. So certainly reach out to her.
Can I just throw in one more quick thing? This is there was another question on here about accessory apartments. And again, I think accessory apartments are a good tool in the toolkit for creating more housing options that are more affordable by nature. Because again, they're within a single family house or over a garage or in a barn, and they're smaller than the primary dwelling. They can be more affordable, but what we see very commonly in Cornwall and across Litchfield County is they're used as Airbnbs or short-term rentals. And it's hard to blame the property owner because, they can get just as much rent or more by only renting it for less days. But it has made, again, what was already a very small number of units available in the county or in Cornwall to rent even smaller. So it's just really decreased the number of, the availability of year-round rentals.
Great. I appreciate that. So Jill, do you want to come up quickly? You said you have a couple of comments. If you can do that really quickly so we can get to our final other lightning round. You have a couple of questions about reducing required lot sizes.
Okay. Where am I?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Why can't you see me? I don't understand.
That's all right. We can hear you.
All right. I had a couple of things to say. One was that I was the chair of the housing section of the town plan. And one of the things that we suggested that we hoped that the Zoning and Planning Commission could do would be to create the possibility for having smaller lot sizes. And I can tell you that the meeting at which this was discussed was the largest meeting of the housing section, and it was a very hostile meeting. It was clear that the people in Cornwall really did not want to have smaller lot sizes. And yet I feel that this is one very important tool for making housing more affordable in Cornwall. That's one. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the idea of co-housing, where the houses would be smaller and there would be a common building. And again, this could go along with a conserved piece of land. And it would be much more inexpensive, both to build and to maintain.
So Jocelyn, can I ask you to take this question about, I think there can be a lot of fears about smaller lot sizes and higher density, but I think you made the point. I think your images show that, there are many examples, I think, of moderate density developments that could fit in with the Cornwall landscape. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and how.
Absolutely. No.
Sure. Yeah, I do. I have a slide in here, but I won't throw my slides back up. But I do think if anyone wants to see some more, other than driving by Bonnie Brook or Cougaman Village, if you want to see some more examples of what moderate density affordable housing can look like in some of the other small towns in Northwest Connecticut, we do have a short 10-minute video on the Regional Housing Council's website, which is nwcthousing.org. There is a 10-minute video that shows you kind of an aerial view and also on the ground view of what affordable housing can look like that is at that moderate density. It can be, as you say, very attractively designed to fit into the landscape. And, you know, the nice thing about that video is you can also hear from some of the folks. Maggie Cooley is on the video to kind of just talk about, you know, some of the questions you might have around how those got developed and who lives there and that sort of thing. So nwcthousing.org.
Okay,
I
that's
believe that
great.
was the Cornwall Housing Corporation website.
Yes,
Cornwall Housing
or go,
Corporation.
yes, go there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I think, I mean, the point is the math is such that, you know, if you're building on, you know, the 10 units on a smaller parcel of land because you're building a higher density, that's going to be more land left over than if you had to, you know, build on 1 acre, 2 acre lots. So I skipped a question. Sorry about that. So George asked about Trinity Church and whether they have been approached. It was, and I think Bart may have. I mean, maybe.
Well,
we could follow up
as you
about that. I
know,
don't know if we want to dig down into too
Right,
much of the
right.
specifics
No,
there, but it's certainly a
that's certainly-
potential.
yeah, as a potential, especially since that will be near the sewer system, that would be
Yeah.
a wonderful idea to explore.
Yeah.
It hasn't been yet, but it would be, you know, I could imagine myself living there, looking out at my favorite river to fish on. Anyway, that's down the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
down the
think
road, but we are working on. Let me just say, some of us are working on speaking to Trinity. So
good. Well,
I can't talk too much about that. But
thank goodness Queen Anne left them most of Manhattan.
so
We've really, Ingrid, reached the end of our time. This has been a great discussion. Do you have anything before we close? I just wanted to wrap up.
no, I think you should go ahead and wrap up.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks to the panel, Ingrid, Jocelyn, Ginni, Heidi, and Anna. Your wisdom and insight on these two mandates have been very helpful. And second of all, thank you all in the audience for participating. Getting community input and understanding what the questions are that you have is very important. And finally, I just finished reading the latest town report, and I'm awestruck at the number of volunteers in Cornwall that, for all kinds of different organizations, volunteer their time. I lived in Tennessee for a little while. I think that's called the volunteer state, but this should be the volunteer town. And I want to thank all the volunteers in Cornwall, and I hope that we can carry out that plan, leading Cornwall to a better place. So with that, we're going to end it. And I hope many of you will be going to listen to the library's presentation by Roxana Robinson on Georgia O'Keeffe. That's why we started at 3. But thank everybody, and we're going to sign off now.
Thank you, Bart.
Thank you all.